Okay, so welcome to the Node.js Community Package Maintenance Team meeting for January 28th, 2019. We're going to follow the agenda as outlined in the issue for the meeting. And let me just start out on that. So the first thing is, are there any announcements that people would like to share? Okay, if there's no announcements, let's move on to the things that are tagged with the agenda. So the first one is engaging enterprise teams to better understand challenges at scale. So this is number 138. Unfortunately, Ahmad, who opened this, let me know he wasn't going to be able to make it this week. He's flying on a plane, I guess, with no Wi-Fi in addition. So the idea between this one is kind of two things. He's helping to lead the packet, or sorry, the user feedback initiative around enterprise. And there's sort of two pieces. One, the first one is like, you know, how can we leverage the experience from those enterprises in terms of, you know, providing feedback to the project and so forth. And the other one I know that I've talked to Ahmad and a number of other people about is how do we basically help enterprises, you know, one, recognize that they're dependent on a number of modules and which modules, and sort of help them make the business case for getting involved in this kind of effort to help maintain those packages. And I know Ahmad has had a number of ideas in terms of, you know, tools I think he has to be able to identify the packages that a company's working and using. I also think that Glenn and Edmund are interested in that. I think at this point, I'd suggest we defer discussion until we have a few of the other people. Defer it to GitHub for now, unless anybody wants to jump in or has some comments on that particular issue for this week.
I just want to say that I know Ahmad was working on a tool over the weekend that I was kind of discussing with him. So, you know, there's some stuff coming up, I think, that he's working on. But yeah, I think deferring till he's here would be a smart idea.
Okay. So yeah, so anybody's got comments, anybody's watching, please jump into the issue, start discussing. But that's, you know, I think one of the very key things. So I'm going to suggest we add that. We sort of had three things we were focusing on. I would add that as our fourth thing to focus on as we sort of get bootstrapped and kicked off.
I just want to jump in and say, you know, I'm here. I work with Red Hat, and it's a big issue for us at this point. So we're definitely eager to be involved in that conversation.
Okay. So yeah, so if you have, you know, any ideas or thoughts, just say, you know, add them into the issue or tools or whatever, that would be good. Okay. Just gonna well, nose should be our fourth area focus as we jump. Okay. Okay, so having said that, let's move on to the next one, which is baseline practices, brainstorm the initial list. That is number 119. So the status where we're at on that one, this is kind of one of the baseline practices. This is one of the sort of three, now hopefully four key areas we're focusing on to make some progress on. The status on this one is I think there was some good discussion, and we're kind of a couple of the members so Gentian and Mentes, we're going to sort of work to provide a good summary. The one concrete thing I think we can dive into, though, on that front is I created a PR for an initial best practice in one of the areas that had been discussed in a few different issues. And this is around, it's number 139, pull request number 1. And it's around documenting support level. So there were a couple of issues. One that was suggesting that, you know, we should have document your business case. There's one which was around, we had some discussion around the, you know, trying to document your support level. The idea being that, you know, if there's a mismatch between expectations and of what the maintainer thinks they're going to provide and what the consumer expects, that can cause some friction. So properly documenting that from the outset would sort of help both the maintainer and the consumers. And the suggestion here is actually that it goes into the package.json. It's got currently today 4 as I've written it up, but I think if people jump in and have other ideas, we'll evolve that. Sort of the 4 dimensions that I had under support were like the target. So what target level is a maintainer thinking about providing? What kind of response you can expect? And I don't know if this is right, but I included 2 different flavors, a response and a response paid. So you could have something that says, hey, if you just consuming open source, you can get this kind of response. If you're willing to pay, you could get this kind of response. And then backing, which was the one that kind of reflected the business model. And in there sort of, so it's for each of those, it's not intended to be like an ordered list or anything like that. It's more like licenses where you can define what you think whatever you're providing on those dimensions. In theory, it would be nice to have like, not an unlimited set of different things, but like a common set that most people can just choose from. So I've tried to define a few of those as a starting point. So for example, on the, actually, I'm gonna look at the non-PR view of that. So for example, the support target, the list that's there now is abandoned. No, it's not recommended to be used, it's deprecated. So that's like, don't use it. There's none, which is, it's not that we're telling you not to use it, but use it at your own risk because there's no support. And this dimension is sort of like what levels of node would be supported in some sense. So like node latest, this will only support the latest version of node LTS. So it's maintained for all the active versions of node Node that are LTS. So for example, today that would be 6, 8, and 10. And you wouldn't need to take a Semver major breaking change because you would get critical fixes for those releases. And then node superset, which means that it would be maintained for more than the LTS, and you would specify what that is.
Is there a reason that couldn't be defined as engines? So effectively, like defining the version ranges, and then honestly, this is something I've been wanting to build anyway. Create a bot that will automatically update that for the maintainers.
So
just because it's prior art, basically.
I'm not quite following. Like, use the engines. I know the engines is a field where you can say these are the ones that it can run on, right?
Yeah. So engines basically tells well, npm doesn't consume it anymore, but it is supposed to tell npm, and I believe npm start what engines, so like what npm version is minimum, or what npm version ranges are acceptable, and also what node version ranges are acceptable. This also isn't just node and npm though. It could be like what yarn versions are acceptable or something like that. Like it's not specific.
Right. Okay.
So for example, if you wanted to do like node LTS, you can go through and define all of the LTS versions of node with a Semver range and greater than less than type stuff. This also, you could effectively just map what you were mentioning to those ranges, since there's this prior art of engines that is like already a known quantity in the ecosystem.
Right. I'd have to think about it more. I'm not sure it covers all of the cases, in that I don't think it would give you a way to say whether it's abandoned or whether you get no support.
Yeah, no, I'm specifically talking about like the LTS and the terms that you were mentioning. Like here is the kind of case. Maybe I'm misunderstanding. Sorry.
I know it's good to think about if there's something existing we can re-leverage for sure. I'm just like I think we probably don't need to figure it out now, so I can take another look at what engines means. My first thought is they're potentially overlapping in some way. Like you might be able to derive the engines from the support target.
Yep.
But not necessarily the other way around.
Yeah. Maybe. Yeah.
But yeah, it would be worth explaining. No matter what, it would be worth explaining how they might relate. So.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's kind of the support target, that's the dimension. The support response then is, has the how quickly you might expect a response. So like, is it abandoned? So you don't expect a response. Best effort, which is like, hey, this isn't my day job, but if I have time, I'll get to you. I have regular 7 and regular 1, which is like, hey, we may be able to get there within an answer between 1 or 7 days. And then 24/7, which is like the, hey, we have dedicated resources. And then backing is kind of, I had the dimensions of abandoned. It's a hobby. So basically, hey, I'm just doing this at home for fun. Sponsored, single maintainer, but depends on sponsorship. Bounty, it's bounty backed. Project, there's a project behind it. So for example, we have a number of modules in Node.js Foundation. I guess maybe that's a little bit conflicting maybe with the next one, which is Foundation. So it's maintained and supported under the auspice of a foundation. Company, so it's maintained by a company, and then commercial. So it's, in this case, company and commercial, I just spelled out as one is like, hey, it's backed by a company, but it's not necessarily part of their business. And commercial is like, this is part of our business to deliver. So I guess any comments or thoughts on that people have?
I found the naming a little bit confusing, but I didn't come better alternatives. So
okay, which parts did you find confusing?
To me, it doesn't give me the sense of a progression.
Right, and it wasn't meant to be a progression, because I think there'll be so many variations that
so
one's not beyond the next one, right? It's just different.
Yes, that is more or less my issue here, in the sense that if we don't provide it as a progression, then we are essentially making our life, making people harder to understand, making this harder to understand.
Yeah, I wonder whether it's possible to be able to make a progression, right? Like licenses, is it that people will have their different combinations of what they're willing to provide, and they won't necessarily be able to pick one if it's in a progression. I see Joel has his hand up.
Hey, yeah, I just have a quick question and maybe a little bit back. So first of all, for this support field in package.json, is it something that anyone can simply add to their package.json and publish to NPM? Is that what we're thinking? Or is it something that will be added on by NPM when they publish package?
No, I think initially it would just be, this would be something we're saying, hey, the best practice or the baseline practice we're recommending is to add these fields into your package as a way to document what levels you're going to be providing. I think if we agree that this is a good idea and once we've locked it down, I think going to NPM to at least ask for like a default to be added in an NPM init, or submitting PRs to try and do that would be a good thing. Okay. So, but yeah, it's something I think we could just do by hand to start, and then hopefully get some sort of support from NPM if we can. Yeah.
So as of now, anything in package.json is open to the author. The author can add whatever they want when they publish. And I guess the goal of this support field is just to as an FYI, rather than something that say a consumer can rely on.
Well, I mean, until it gains traction, you wouldn't necessarily be able to rely on it. But so, for example, like you can scan for licenses, you could then make tools that could scan for particular support levels, right? And so, if you wanted to say that we have a preference for modules that support LTS, all of the node LTSs, you would be able to figure that out.
If they have that field.
If they have that field, right? Yeah, right. I mean, yes. I mean, it's not that if there's no information, you can't figure that out. But if we can encourage and promote it, hopefully over time there would be more and more information to use.
Yeah, okay. So generally for us, whenever we're not terribly concerned about the support level of the package we consume. I mean, we consume a lot of package for our internal use and everything. And typically we just, you use a package, and if, you know, if the package has documentation that give us enough information on how to use it, and we pretty much just consume it and not really care about the level of support on, going forward. And having this support is probably useful, you know, at an upfront level when for example, when we first go to, hey, I want to use that package, and after looking at document, it looks good, it looks like it's going to meet our needs. Obviously, we've never been concerned with, like, going forward, what kind of support can we get, and so can we pay for some usage if we really need it. That topic has never really gotten on our mind much. But I think having this field would be useful. You know, at least like we have a good idea of what we are getting into. And sorry, I'm probably jumping back a little bit regarding the node LTS thing. For us, actually, we probably is still supporting like way back to Node version 4, but it's not a big problem for us. It's getting to be more sort of a slight problem because we have teams who refuse to upgrade from Node 6. I mean, at this point, I've pretty much gotten everyone to upgrade to at least Node 6. I'm like, anytime I found out someone is still using Node 4, the first thing I'm going down there like personally and say, we're upgrading to Node, at least Node 6 today. I mean, but like we'll upgrade latest LTS. But yeah, so no version is not a big major issue for us, and as long as, you know, and we typically try to use Babel or whatever to transpile everything. So yeah, that's not a huge problem.
So do you do you upgrade your modules much? So for example, if you're using 6 and a module owner needed, you needed to get a new version of the module, but that was Semver Major.
A lot of the times we found that Node version problem is because of people like use new syntax, and these days with TypeScript, pretty much everything needs to be transpiled anyway. So we found that most, like 90% of the time, anytime a module has a like we need no version that is because of the JavaScript syntax or something, and usually they transpile, or at least they have option of say, if you are using no version lower than that, you need to require that extra file. So that's not a big problem. And usually the problem is around vulnerability or security problem that's found. And I guess the Node.js has been keeping up as long as LTS support. So I guess version 4 is EOL now, but version 6 is still getting some patches for security issues. So that's why we're still kind of say we support Node 6.
Yeah, Node 6 goes out of service at the end of April. So
yeah.
Yeah, I mean the like in terms of the Node LTS, it was intended to get that same level of, it'd be like if people are willing to do that to get a similar level of support along the lines of the LTS releases. Now you're saying that, like, I guess I'm trying to understand a little bit the TypeScript. So if you're using a third-party module,
mm-hmm.
You're saying that you've never really had any problems where say for example, you needed a security fix or you needed an update, but that required a later version of LTS, like a later version of Node, or required you to make Semver Major changes to stick with your current version of Node. Right.
So we've never run into a blocker because of that, because Node.js is still support back to version 6. I mean, as soon as April comes around and Node.js EOL on Node 6, we will be taking Node 6 off of the list for us, and we'll
I
force
don't
anyone
actually
to upgrade.
mean Node itself. I meant in the modules that you consume.
Oh, okay.
Like
Yeah,
these
haven't
are all for
found
the
that.
modules as opposed to Node itself.
Okay. Yeah, we haven't seen a problem with that. And as soon as we see a module that says, we for this module, you must be using, say, version 8, otherwise you have this vulnerability that will not be patched or anything, then we'll consider that.
Okay, but that's not something you've run into too often.
I don't recall having run into that yet.
Okay. Okay, so I guess, you know, continue the conversation in the GitHub issue itself, unless anybody has something else they want to. Matteo, I don't know if you had anything else you want to add on this front.
No, not really. But I would really love to have it as a progression versus then a set of unrelated elements, and because otherwise it will be extremely hard for even for a company to understand what they are getting into. So
yeah, I would agree with that as well. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
oh yeah, no, that's it.
So I guess, you know, if you can suggest what a progression like is what's there, because like somehow I'm not sure. Yeah, if you can think about them and what, you know, make suggestions based on what a progression would look like, that would be good.
Could you link where they're listed, like in textual format?
Like they're in the PR.
Cool, thank you. Yeah, so I mean, the path I would go is abandoned at the bottom. I mean, like thinking about it as the LTS chart, abandoned effectively maps the EOL. Then actually, no, none abandoned, node LTS, node superset, and node latest. And honestly, I also don't know if node is even needed there. Like that seems, since this is like that node dash part is not necessarily even needed, and I would actually remove that entirely.
Also, one more thing here that makes it's not exactly clear. It's in some form you mentioned node LTS as active LTS, but we also have maintenance LTS. So for my point of view, when I talk about node LTS, it means like node 6 at this point in time.
Well, I mean, so what was meant to be, and if you read that link on the LTS, like what I meant was, and maybe the naming is just completely wrong, is that like we are tying our support to the node LTS versions. So I have module X, and I'm going to try and make my module work with all of the node LTS versions. Versus node latest is like, you can get my module, but it's only going to work for the latest version of node. Or that's where I'm going to update, you know, if you want security fixes, you're going to have to move up to the latest version of node.
Yeah,
So it's not related to maintenance of node itself. It's just that it's that the module is trying, you know, if you're generally, I think people likely upgrade their applications to new versions of node infrequently. And so when you do that, that's a good time to say, okay, I'm moving from node 8 to node 10. At that point, I'm going to have to retest, so I can, you know, take new versions of modules. I can take, you know, minor tweaks for some major changes, stuff like that. And at that point, it makes sense to do everything and do all those updates. Whereas if I've got an app, it's in production, I've got the same version of Node, and I have to take a semver breaking change in a package, that's probably more of a challenge.
Yeah, still, it's the text does not match.
Yeah, I would change that from active LTS to LTS. Like
Where's
that.
active?
The node LTS, the package maintained from for the active node.js LTS releases.
Okay,
so,
yeah, I just meant All the Node.js releases, sure, okay.
Yeah, so I would put it in parentheses active and maintain. So it's to replace that active with all, and or maybe all for the Node.js LTS releases, active and maintenance.
I think I can just take out active, right?
Yeah, you can just take out active and that covers that.
Yeah. Okay. Because yeah, if that's confusing, I can see that.
Or I would also specify including maintenance, because a lot of people do not.
Yeah.
There was a lot of confusion in the past.
Okay. Okay. So active or maintain for the Node.js releases, both in active and maintenance mode.
That does raise a question, because like I know Webpack generally tries to do maintenance and then cuts it a few months before the maintenance goes EOL.
Right.
Do we need like LTS active to state that they just support the active lines? I don't think Webpack will ever use that, but it's an interesting question.
That's sort of where I was coming from in terms of there could be a number of variations, right? Just like licenses. So
to me, let me be clear. To me, node latest means nothing.
Okay, so we can come up with, we'll think about better names.
I mean, I think we probably need to be as flexible as NPM in terms of how they do like NPM scripts, where you can just like add a prefix or a suffix and it works in terms of like parsing this. Or we want to be super rigid. Like either of those works, but I think that's where we need to kind of, we need to figure out that before we go down the path of like building this out more. Is like, do we want to be rigid and say, like if you're going to support LTS, you're going to support all LTS, or if you want to, or do we want to allow that granularity? And will that, like, I guess in the spirit of what this is for, will that granularity allow people or allow enterprise users or other kinds of users who want to kind of build tooling off this? Will that be a hindrance or will that be a benefit? And I think less options is probably more of a benefit, but at the same time, that's not how our community or ecosystem works. So yeah, I'm not sure.
Right. Like, I mean, I think we can even define a preferred set, or, you know, we can encourage people to pick from a smaller subset, but forcing that, I think, might just mean that you end up with other, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And for what it's worth, I would absolutely drop the node prefix on latest and LTS and superset.
Okay. Well, yeah, if you can just add comments into the issue, that would be good. Because
okay, is it an open PR or is it an issue? Like, what's the number?
It's an open PR. It is
okay,
PR number 1, I believe.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. I will do that. Thank you.
So yeah, so that's PR number 1. Any comments, add that in, and yeah, I think we'll have a you know, discussion will be ongoing, but hopefully we can come up to some reasonable names and so forth.
Cool.
Okay, that's all I had to say on the baseline practices. Otherwise, we're going to, you know, outline a set, and then similar to this one, start opening PRs. I did open that one like we have a draft subdirectory, so we'll probably start them into draft, and then once we're happy enough, we can promote them into the regular doc area. So the next one is number 113, which is which problems Node.js OSS maintainers face today. I'm trying to remember, Matteo, is that, yeah, that's the one that you were going to push on. So do you want to give us an update?
Sorry, which link?
Here, number 113.
Okay.
Pasting it in the chat there.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I have been completely disconnected in the sense that there's been a lot of discussions on GitHub, and more or less they kind of exhausted themselves, and unfortunately I didn't sum it up. So I think the discussion is almost ready to be summed up somehow. but I have been completely taken off to do other stuff. So I'm sorry.
Okay. Yeah, I think
did.
in the last meeting, we also discussed trying to reach out with more maintainers, like to identify, you know, a set of package maintainers that we would go and ask if they had a bit of time to try and give us feedback on what the biggest problems they had. And I think Wes was going to put together a list of some initial packages like friendlies, so that was going to be part of it. And if people have other suggestions of who we should reach out to, I think, you know, if we can summarize that and then come out with a list that says, this is what we got from internal discussion, but let's go talk to these maintainers to get.
Yeah, I'll do that.
Okay.
And
sounds good. Okay, so on the next one, so process to identify and engage key packages. Wes, who's not here today, is pushing on that one. Let me just see if there's anything at the end. Nope, but his next action was to basically open 3 new issues, which were around, let me see if we have any new issues. 3 new issues that were for the specific pieces of the sort of proposal that he proposed there in terms of the steps. And so basically that's the next step on that front. So we're just waiting for those issues and then we'll start to push along those. Discourage the use of unmaintained packages. So let me just see, we had some discussion on that last time. Just trying to see if there's any. We did discuss a little bit. I have to go look back at the last minutes in terms of deprecate and using. It was around that, you know, there's already a deprecate option in NPM, and do we need some sort of evangelization around suggesting people use that deprecate? Now, we did think that we needed to be a bit careful on that front, because then that may cause, you know, as people install and whatever, you get deprecation messages, right? So it means that, you know, now there's dependencies that other modules need to worry about because they're deprecated.
And I don't think we should be shy about that, personally. Like, if something's deprecated, it should be throwing a message. And like, if the maintainers of that module that is pulling that in need to go update something, that they should probably be updating that regardless. Am I off on that? Or do other people have kind of contrarian opinions to that?
I guess it's in terms of the deprecated modules, that's something you will see when you do an npm install.
Yep, exactly.
Right. I mean, that might be something to test on, you know, if we get a set of friendly module owners we can work on, that we could test with them.
Sorry, I'm jumping in a little bit here.
Yeah.
We are not, we've never been concerned with deprecated packages ourselves, to be honest. Probably something that we should look into more. But when, you know, nowadays, every time any one of our apps, when, you know, when they do a npm install, because they have a package lock or they have some kind of lock, that list of like this package deprecated messages is getting longer and longer, and no one is raising any concern about that. As long, you know, we have a ton of functional tests and unit tests that takes like an hour to run every time we try to do a build and release, even for a small bug fix. So no one seems to be ever concerned with that long list of deprecated messages.
Yeah, that's an interesting comment. That, I mean, so it's that I guess you figure those just work and will continue to work, right?
Yeah. It's not until like a functional test or unit test fails or something goes wrong that people start looking into these things. I mean, most of our developers, they're so scared of like getting a P0 on live site that they would end up having the support, is that they're very, very cautious about upgrading anything. Anytime we make some new release ourselves, it takes us a lot of effort trying to convince people to upgrade.
Right. Yeah. I mean, do you upgrade it when you upgrade to a new version of Node, do you do more testing and validation at that point?
Yeah, we spend 6 months at least doing all kind of tests, and
right.
And then like doing the like 5% tests on live site, on only on like 1 or 2 VMs, or sometimes we even do like on like a backup VMs.
Right. Do you ever, so at that point when you're upgrading Node, do you ever then update your modules and do some cleanup at that point?
We selectively unlock dependencies.
Right.
We don't just like blow away package.json
Sure.
and just do install.
Yep. Okay, but you would do a little bit at that point.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
And so the basic primary concern for people is not getting site issues, especially if we get a live issue that like get the attention of our CTO, then you don't want that.
Right. Yeah, no, you don't want the I can understand. That was sort of around the, you don't want to be forced to change, but I guess, it sounds like even for security issues, you'd be hesitant to upgrade modules.
Yes, I would say that's kind of the case, unfortunately. For example, we still have teams who's running on Happy 14, even though I've been, and everyone's been kind of telling them like, hey, Happy has stopped patching anything lower than version 16 and things like that.
Right, okay. Okay, so on this one, I guess the next step is we need somebody to, I guess we kind of need to decide, is this something like we could write another baseline practice, which would be, we recommend that you deprecate. I don't know, Tierney, do you have any interest in doing that?
I have interest. I'm not sure if I have time right now, unfortunately.
Okay. Because I think that's kind of the next step on this one. We could, unless we think it's not a good idea, we could write up a baseline practice and take a look at what it looks like and sort of work through objections or non-objections as we put together.
So I guess with that, just like a clarifying question, is this like for when package maintainers should deprecate, or like what's the context here of like what the document is supposed to contain?
It would basically be a recommendation for, yes, when and how you should use the deprecate command.
Okay.
Right, like,
yeah.
The comment was it exists there, it's underused. So if we actually have, our baseline practice, it's like, okay, and here's how we recommend you use it. And then, you evangelize something like that, because you can then say, hey, we've written this down. This is the way we suggest you do it. And then you can, publicize that, and then, work to make it easy to do that, and then encourage people to do those kinds of things if we think it's useful, right?
Hey, I'm happy to take a step at this. And
okay.
I'll ping you offline. Thanks.
Yeah, no, it sounds good. I mean, I think the end result is just like the first pull request, which is into the drafts document. So that's kind of like our working area PR that puts something into there, and we can go from there. Okay, so Joel, I'll just take a note that you'll take a first cut at that. And then sort of moving on to the next issue then, which is number 17. Provide template guides automation for common maintainer needs. So this is number 17. Let me open up that one. Okay. So this one, yeah, I guess it's on the agenda because it's interesting in that there's there's a bunch of resources, templates that, and even automation that would be really useful for maintainers. And having, you know, a base set that people could use, you know, not everybody will use the same ones, but, you know, if there was a baseline set. So Wes, maybe go ahead.
Sorry, I was gonna say, I think having like for us, so like thinking about this from a more like DevRel point of view, I know that like as a DevRel, if there is something that like I can go contribute a template to for my company, I will usually end up going and doing that. And I know a bunch of others do that as well. Yep. So perhaps a good approach to this might be to actually set up like, here are the things we want. So like you're testing on like all of the current node, all of the alive, like not EOL node versions. You're testing on Windows, Mac, and Linux. And then like a couple of like whatever other things we want to use in terms of that. And then be able to actually go have a repo of CI, like JavaScript CI templates or module CI templates, maybe is what we would want to name that. And then have people like community members can come and contribute that. I know like I have one that I've been using for Travis CI that I would be happy to go contribute and also enhance, because like this isn't something people do. So I think that having that like guideline of here's the checklist. If you want to contribute, make sure it has these things. Or if it's a limitation of your platform, like it can't do Windows builds, which is like was Travis for a long time.
Right.
If it's a limitation, meet this as best as possible and also note the limitation. So, you know, I think doing it in that way is really good. And I'd also be happy to help out with this as much as possible.
Okay. So, yeah, I mean, I think, because yes, I think Wes had mentioned, or LJ Harp, I can't remember who, you know, one of them had already some templates for Travis to test across things. So I think you know, you hit the nail on the head that there's a bunch of resources out there. What we need is a structure that says, you know, as a maintainer, what are the common things you want to do and the templates and automation that will help you, and then we can let people fill that in.
Yeah, for sure.
So if you want to take a cut at that sort of top level structure of here's what the kind of things you want, and we, you know, we just need to figure out, okay, how do we get that into this repo? And then, you know, we can sort of ask people to say, hey, if you got something, you know, contribute to get these things in here.
Yeah, awesome. Sounds good.
Okay, so I'm going to say Tierney volunteered to provide some structure PR in that structure to the repo so we can ask fill it in. Okay, that's good. Okay, and that's the end of what was tagged for the agenda. Does anybody have any other topics they want to add on for this this time?
I just have a quick question now that with everyone here. So it's becoming more of a like a topic that at company level, our InfoSec is becoming more and more of a, to be honest, a pain in the ass for us. But the reason I mentioned that is because this whole npm install, as everyone know, when every time you do npm install, it automatically runs, you know, all the npm scripts like pre-install, post-install, install, and that's becoming of becoming on the radar for our InfoSec, because some of our teams they deploy an application to production and then they run npm on each VM. And that's our production machine that have access to everything. And so it's rather risky for npm script to run. Is there anything that's happening in that front where some kind of tool, or what is the security working group doing anything to help out with preventing or having some kind of control at what package npm script can execute when we do npm install? I mean, I don't I don't think that's something for this group, but what's on horizon?
One thing I will say that I've kind of gone and tried to do is I actually went to the NPM community ideas section and made a proposal for this. I can probably turn it into an RFC eventually. But basically it's extending the ignore script flag or ignore scripts flag to be extensible. So basically right now, if you use the ignore scripts, and also this is something your team can do right now. If you just use ignore scripts in like an npm-rc, or when you're passing npm install, you can just do -- ignore scripts, and that will ignore all scripts, including like test and run and things like that, which isn't necessarily ideal. But if that's something that'll help your team, that might be something you want to look into. I can follow up with you on that. But I've proposed basically an extension to that where it's ignore dash and then the script name. So like in your case, it would be -- ignore - install - scripts,
Okay.
which would effectively allow you to have a little bit more customization around that and control. I've been discussing with the NPM team. They seem unconvinced about why it would be needed or why it would be useful. So if you have that kind of feedback, that would be super nice to get your feedback in that thread. I posted that in the Zoom chat, and it's all for community listeners. It's npm.community, and then it's on npm.community, and it's the thread is @ignore scripts in the ideas category.
One thing to be said to answer this problem is, and I'm sorry to say this in a very blunt term, if you're running npm install on production machines, your deployment strategy, continuous deployment, ? Is completely vulnerable and should be changed immediately.
Yes,
I totally agree with that, actually. So that's
so it's not even a matter of something for us. It's something for us in the sense that, and the security working group probably to document and deploy, to document and communicate clearly how to deploy or manage node.js in an enterprise. And
yes, I totally agree with that. And we do have a standard practice on how to do that. But there are the teams who prefer to run their own node development on their own. So they do everything on their own. And that's one of the practice they do. Every time I see someone mentions that, the first thing I do, like, you cannot do that. I don't. Yeah. But yeah, so it's not, we're a pretty big company. We have hundreds of teams deployed all over the world, and like I get people who I've never heard of in come and say, hey, I do this with Node. I'm like, oh my God.
Yeah, exactly. So again, it's as a theme for this specific problem, though, it might be very good to have some defined resources on how to define a deployment pipeline to mitigate the problem, because that's the way everybody's doing it. Okay, yeah. So it's just a matter of writing this thing down and setting how to set up a proper pipeline.
Yeah, totally agree.
Yeah, I mean, that's not a topic that's been discussed recently or at all. I don't think from what I remember in the security working group. You could open an issue there to kind of raise and frame the discussion and say, hey, this would be useful.
I don't like too much talking about other people, but I know 100% that both David Gonzalez and Alex Knoll in that working group are actually like doing this every day. Yeah. So
okay.
It's basically, I'm sure you'll get some good feedback. Just open an issue.
Yeah, 100%.
Maybe it's something like, can we define or provide some best practices for deployment to avoid X, right?
Okay.
I think we also can't ignore the fact that there's also sort of containerized deployments that may have different kind of requirements or restrictions.
Right. So you're just saying that maybe sometimes it's more of a challenge in those in those cases.
Yeah, yeah. Because what is a production machine in that case? Is it the container? Is it?
Well, I mean, you would in that case, you would build the you shouldn't. Yeah, you would be putting the node modules directory inside of the container, or installing it and in a multi-stage build, and then using the finally built container and shipping that part to production.
Exactly.
And so, like, yeah, you still wouldn't be npm installing in production.
Yeah, you could. It may actually help you in terms of, you build your container beforehand and it's frozen. So in production, you don't need to do any npms. Okay, so Joel, it sounds like you'll open an issue in the security working group because I think we've tried to scope, security concerns and stuff to be outside the scope of this group and push them over to the security working group side.
Yep. Okay.
I got to go now. I have another meeting.
Yep. I think we're at the end of the agenda. So unless are there any other things people want to add on? Okay, I did ask in the chat. About a few minutes, 5 minutes ago, I did paste into the chat for YouTube saying if there's any questions, please ask them now. I don't see anything, so I think we don't have any QA this week. So thanks for everybody who attended, and thanks to everybody who took some actions. I'll capture them in the minutes, send those out, and we'll talk in 2 weeks again, and obviously through GitHub. Hopefully we can make some good progress before then. Thanks. Talk to everybody later.
All right. Bye.
Bye.